I've been brought another old knife that has an old sheath and has never really fitted. And the sheath is just falling apart because it wasn't really made very well to start with. It's just too thin a leather. Somebody has altered it over time to make it fit a larger belt, which it was made to fit a really small one to start with. It lost the strap. All in all, this is an example of a really bad knife sheath because it doesn't do its job of safely holding the knife. You can actually, it's even been restitched once because the point of the knife has managed to cut its way out of it. So the task is to make a knife sheath very similar to this one, only a lot better. 4 pieces of leather. This was just 2 pieces. I'm going to use a front piece, a back piece, and a spacer piece in between to make a thicker, heavier pocket for the knife. And then I'm actually attaching, for this top part, I'm going to put this piece and a liner piece on it and attach it on. And what that's going to do is it's going to leave a little ledge here where that leather is going to be, the thickness of the leather is going to fit up against this guard and make everything fit a lot nicer. We're going to want to scab it on the back so it doesn't make a big lump where we're going to be on the back of the sheath. We want a lump on the front where the knife goes in to fit that guard, but we do not want a lump rubbing against the person that's wearing it or causing problems when I go to stitch it. And then we'll do the same thing on the piece that's going to be our lining. When I put those together, I'll probably put it just a little bit off because it's going to be against the back of the sheath where you're not going to see it, and both those pieces will end in different places, and then we'll wind up with a nice smooth transition into the back of our sheath. And don't forget that you need a front and a back. You need to flip that piece. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with just 2 fronts, and it is not going to work out well. Front for back. And for our spacer, we'll go down in this little bit flankier piece of leather here. We'll do the same outside tracing. Right along this line. Okay, so front, back, liner piece, the upper part, the spacer, and a little bit that we can use for a strap. That should be all the pieces that we need for this except for some hardware. And next step, we'll go ahead and get this some edge beveling done, get this stamped, get stitching lines marked out on it. We're going to put some stitching grooves on this piece as well. Since I'm lining it, I do want to actually stitch around the edge. Otherwise your layers could separate later and cause trouble. Now let's mark and just put a stamp border on this real quick. One of the added kind of, you don't always see it steps, this glass burnisher. Really, sometimes this tool kind of, when it pushes into the leather, it'll push the leather up around it. And if you take that burnisher, you can go over it, smooth down those bits that have been pushed back up above the surface, and it makes everything look just a little bit neater and smoother. And it also kind of cleans up and smooths out any off-kilter grain issues you might have in the leather in the center too. It just makes everything look a little bit nicer there where you've wet it down and stamped it. Now I'm gonna turn the camera off and give this a bit to dry, and then I'll be back to go ahead and put some color on these pieces. Let these dry entirely. Now it's time for some Reselling for a finish. And we gotta let it dry again. Now, this is going to be a little more complicated than if this was all one solid back piece to put together. And the reason for that is I need to glue this together, stitch it, and then attach it to this piece and stitch that before I can glue these pieces onto it. So that means instead of just gluing it all together and making it into a knife sheath and then just going and stitching it, I need to do it in some gluing, some stitching, more gluing, more stitching. But like a lot of things, contact cement and most glues in general work a lot better if you get thin, even coats on there rather than globbing them on where they're thick and thin in places. More is not better on contact cement. And you want to let it sit and dry until it's ready to stick together. Like this piece is getting ready to stick together. This piece here is not yet. I actually want to stick these together to where these two skived edges do not line up with each other. They're parallel to each other. And then I've got this one tapering off and then that one tapering off, and it's a more gradual taper the whole way along. So you'll get a smoother transition to the back of your knife sheath without that bump that would be there. It'll make my stitching easier later on, and it'll also just make it a more nicer finish to the product. Sometimes when you're stitching, especially with machine stitching, I've noticed that lining piece can squish out a little bit. So if you trim it ahead of time, you got to go back and still trim it off anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it, and then we'll move on to trimming this and getting it all ready to glue together the other parts. Okay, so I didn't take the camera downstairs to the sewing machine, but all I really did was stitch around to stitch the liner on, and then I put 2 lines of stitching across to hold the 2 pieces together. The one caught right near the edge where that transitions, and the other one up here is actually going to be our real structure. This is just really to hold this down. Now I'm going to go through and trim, cut out these pieces. That's going to be where your belt goes through. And then I can start gluing together the rest of the sheet to get it all assembled. This is a good time to make sure that the knife is going to fit in there really well. That it goes all the way up to the guard. That it doesn't have too much wobble back and forth. It's going to have some, more than likely. But this is when you can kind of adjust and sort of still peel this apart a bit. Take some of that out if you want. You don't want to get all of it because you don't want the knife to fit too tight.